Hey everyone, I'm Clue, and today we're going to be discussing cold falls once again. So it's been about a week since I posted the two previous videos, my current feelings as well as philosophy and mentality towards cold falls. Now, both of these videos are pretty much me just sitting down and rambling on the spot about my thoughts and current perspective towards cold falls, right? So I think we can develop a bit better of a structured discussion on the subject today, right? Because I've had that week to also reorganize my thoughts and develop a bit better of a perspective towards cold falls. Now, we also have the responses from all of you, right? So anyone who has commented on my videos, thank you. We'll go through all of those at the end, right? Just to sort of go over my responses or some of the other points that people have brought up, right? Just a bit more in depth. But starting off, right? Everything I'm going to say in this video is my own opinion and therefore should be taken with a grain of salt. It is in no way 100% the law, if you will, right? Everyone is welcome to their own opinion and you can just flat out, blatantly call me wrong, right? I don't mind. I love having discussion, and the Fab community has shown themselves to be wonderful, right? Right? Even if you're on the counter side of an argument, right? Everyone is respectful, at least everyone I've come across, and just open for discussion, which is fantastic. So starting off, I just want to spend a little bit of time reaffirming my current position and perspective towards cold falls in view of this reprint philosophy, as well as to some degree the cold fall reprint policy. So the big takeaway to me from this little argument or this little philosophy is this, right? We want single card resellers who invest in Fab to prosper from their investments and the service they provide to the community. They also want players who invest in building their collection to be proud to own something of value. Now, a big thing to me, and the center, if you will, of this discussion is cold foil, common and rare box cards, right? If that makes sense. It's probably a better way of summarizing them. But yeah, the cold foils you pull from a standard set, right? Something you've gone out, bought from an LGS, opened, and you get your one cold foil, right? The value that they retain and their place within the community. Because at the moment, to me personally, they are just junk, right? They're rubbish. They're not really worth anything. They're definitely not worth being the 1 in 24. And to that degree, to me, it feels like cold foils have sort of lost their ideology. Right. So personally, my perspective was that cold falls really fit this second line. Right. The cold fall in your box was the big collector element of opening Fab. All the other cards that you play with, right, aside from the foils or legendaries or fables, the cold fall was your guaranteed collector element. Right. Something that you could store, show off, be proud to own, and would, to some degree, grow in the future. Right. Now, it doesn't have to grow exponentially, but currently, if you took any of the common or rare cold falls that are classified as junk, so probably not weapons, but definitely a lot of the armor pieces from any of the 2.0 sets, and you hold them for 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, I, in all honesty, cannot see them going up immensely in value, right? Probably even not doubling. Despite them being 1 in 24, despite them still being rare cards printed less than the majority of Majestics, just because, personally, I feel that cold falls have lost their branding, right? Again, when I talk about cold falls, I am trying to directly refer back to, again, the common rare box cold falls. The low of the low, right? That is still rare to pull, still hard to pull, still an objective to collect and own all of, but just don't reflect that element correctly in their value or place in the community or perspective that they hold, right? So to that degree, it feels that the branding of cold falls has been irreparably damaged, right? That the community themselves don't value cold falls across the board as they should, and therefore they have lost that spark that makes them something, awesome to own, something great to collect. And I think losing that is a problem, right? Because again, you went out, you bought a box, you're 1 in 24, you're guaranteed cold fall, right? So I thought that was wonderful, that in every box you're guaranteed one piece, one card that was meant for collecting. That's main purpose was to collect, own, and store, and just be proud to have, right? But again, personally, rare, common, even some Majestics, depending on their playability, are awful, okay? Across the board, the majority of cold foils are now being viewed solely on their playability, right? Regardless, again, of rarity or how hard they are to pull. 1 in 24, that's no joke, right? Think about how many cards are going through. In terms of Majestics, it's already 1 to 6, right? And the card pulls aren't that great either, right? Because I know that's the counter argument, if you will, that there are far more majestic, so their actual rarity is higher than a cold foil, but it's still not an easy to get card, right? It's still something you have to go out of your way to collect, but they just don't reflect their value. So in terms of again, my stance, right, I am not happy with cold foils. I don't think they serve the correct purpose, and I think that something should be adjusted to sort of correct their valuation. Now, in saying that, it is a big community perspective thing, right? The community, the secondary market has devalued, right, the unplayable cold foils more so than anything else. And that's not something that LSS can directly change. But that doesn't mean that LSS doesn't have ways to affect that, to correct that, or to just lean completely in it, right? So if cold foils are meant to be the showy piece, right? You get all your equipment cold foils, they're protected by the reprint policy, they're the big bling to show off for your deck, right? Then lean into that. Make all the jank equipment easy to get, right? Take rares, take commons, take ones that are already $2, $1 cards, and just make them easy, right? Make it the equivalent to finding equipment in Rainbow Foil now, right? To find those lesser pieces. Will really allow people to collect, allow people to own, allow people to start being proud once again to build up their collection. I don't really want to make the comparison, but the mentality that I would love to capture is Pokemon, right? So when it comes to Pokemon, yes, kids are easier to stimulate, right, through artistic decisions and printing techniques and shininess, but the mentality that they have towards their cards, right, would be fantastic to recapture for cold foils, for something that is, again, right, we got the reprint policy and the philosophy, and to me that just screamed that cold foils were the big collectible element, which they're not anymore. Yes, Legendary's collectible, Fable's collectible, Promo's collectible, Marvel's, we'll get to that in a second, collectible, but, it should be across the board to me, right? I wish it were like Pokemon cards where no matter which Pokemon card the kid gets in the proper foil version, they're going to be proud to show it off, right? And when I say proper foil, I don't mean like reverse holo, although I'm sure there are kids who are, absolutely, proud to own those cards. But I mean all the different variants of other Pokemon, right, that are like common and rare cold foils, a few dollars, but still exciting to show off. And I think that mentality just isn't there for the players of Flesh and Blood anymore. Mainly because, again, equipment across the board is so heavily tuned towards the high end that everything else just gets brushed away. Right, and the commoner format doesn't really help just yet. I'm sure if there's a bit more competitive sport, we'll see something. But as it is right now, again, I just feel like the majority of cold foils, on average, the box cold foils, rares, and common equipment are just rubbish, right? And either do away with them or work to correct them. That's my mentality and philosophy. Now, speaking of brand, I do want to draw attention to one sort of mentality element, right, that I have come across in researching and reading, right, and that's to do with Fab 2.0. So when Marvel cards were first presented, they had no reference whatsoever to cold foiling, which is quite interesting. I'm sure at the press releases and interviews that James White gave, he expressed that they were cold foil printing, but in all the articles, they're just referred to as Marvel, right, which screams to me that they want to separate them from the cold foil branding, because again, to me, it feels like the cold foil branding has been damaged. That cards printed in cold foil no longer scream collectability, right? You go look if it's a legendary cold foil, you go look if it's a Fable cold foil, anything else, and it's whether or not it's playable for it to actually be collectible, rather than just being a cold foil. Because again, 1 in 24, that is rare, right? That is hard to pull. You are spending at least, $80 in terms of US, right? That's about how much a box is, right? A new box to find a cold foil. Yes, you've got all the other pieces that then pull value away from it, but I think the way that a box ends up getting split is just so heavily skewed away from cold foils at this point that cold foils have been damaged. That the player perspective towards cold foils has helped or is continuing to keep their collectability down. And I think, again, either correct it or lean fully into it, right? Don't bother giving us these collectible elements, right? Do rare and common cold foils really need to be part of this policy? Does protecting them for 10 years, will that equate to them attracting some sort of value because they can never be reprinted? I don't know. The majority of cards are already, right, scarcely reprinted because, again, LSS are very, very conscious of the secondary market and where they want certain cards to be in terms of pricing. So again, it's nice to have the policy, but it does seem wasted for the majority. Because again, I will say majority, because you will find more rares and commons by the time you find all the high value cold foils. So then what else could be done? Well, the simplest solution is just to make rare and common equipment usable, right? So for the majority of weapons, regardless of their rarity, they do retain a better value than armor pieces. And the reason for that is a lot more weapons have the utility to be experimented with, to be used or to be subbed in, because they're not as impactful. They're running your specific legendary armor that you want to make use of their function, or even majestic, right? So if the actual power level were tweaked, and again, the argument that I like to push is common and rare equipment, right, should have a super powerful effect that is one-off, versus legendaries who have a cost-effective or efficient ability that you can make use of over and over again, or vice versa. Either of those dynamics would work perfectly towards making the equipment viable. And we do see this in a lot of the early equipment as well. You could take cards for power plays. If you're an aggressive deck, you might run the common powerful equipment that's short burst. If you're more of a fatigue, a control deck, you'll take the legendary equipment that you can then make effective use of over the course of the game. So definitely tweaking the power level of equipment is a big factor. But the other solution that sort of pops up in my head is to cold foil more cards, right? So in terms of the foil reprint policy, it's fabulous. It's the easiest way to make the top variant of every card, right? You print in cold foil, it can never be touched again in terms of cold foil, so it automatically becomes the rarest piece, right, down the line, right? The mentality towards it is already structured there within the community. So I think if you were to cold foil more cards, right, not just equipment, but anything that then glints and shines and looks great, because the foil is fantastic, right, from LSS. They've always done fantastic foiling, both rainbow foil and cold foil, to the point where, you know, some rainbow foils actually kind of look nicer than certain cold foils. But you take a metallic card, stylized in any way, even probably just blood or any sort of gilding gold, looks fantastic. So if you were to cold foil more cards, and from that there was a bigger board presence towards cold foils within the competitive scene, right? That alone would be enough to mentally, right, raise up cold foils within the community. Sight recognition, seeing that they see you, seeing that they're the ultimate way to customize and bling out your deck, right, would return their collectability, or at least heighten their collectability to me, right? That's the feasible solutions I personally see. Then you also again have the severe approach, right, to just gut foils, cold foils, I mean, right? So aside from the majestics, the legendaries, you make everything easily accessible, and you just lean into their current value. There's no way to salvage them, so you might as well make it so a lot more people can own and start collecting them and build up collections. Right, imagine if you got a few in a box, because again, Flesh and Blood is very much geared towards opening a small quantity for the majority of players and then going to the secondary market. So you got to think mentally in that small quantity. The players are only being exposed to a handful of cold foils, if that, right? If they only open one box for the experience, they're only getting one cold foil, and that's it. And then they just turn to the secondary market, and the majority of people are players, so they're going to prioritize getting their staples, getting their playables before getting their collector pieces. And then even the collectors, well, they're not really going to touch the low-end cold foils, now are they? They're going to touch the ones that will actually appreciate. So, you know, just making them more accessible, allowing more people to get their hands on them in smaller box openings, right, would be fantastic to me. Because again, once you start having any level of collection, you have the drive to flesh out that collection and complete it, right? It's a compulsion almost. So I think that's another way that they could handle it, right? Although, again, more severe, because it then sort of circumvents both of these ideas, right, to make cold foils the scarce collectible rather than just the basis of every collection. But I think being the basis of collecting fab is a great mentality to have, right? Have cold foils represent the collectible side, and then have all the playables represent the playable side, right? To me, nuking every other variant of the Spring Tunic is fine, because the cold foil should be the most collectible element. Legendaries in themselves shouldn't be the collectible aspect to me, right? It should be the cold foil legendaries that are the collectible aspect. And we've seen that accomplished, right, in Dust Till Dawn. But again, every other cold foil, or the lower tier cold foils, to me, they need better management, right? So I would like to see one of the extremes done, right? Either make them scarce, make them useful, make them powerful, or just lean into it heavily and give people who are opening 1-2 boxes the ability to get, a handful of cold foils and then be driven towards trying to complete that set, right? I think in that sense, Everfest sort of worked well. Yes, their cold foils were absolutely cheap and destroyed because they were overprinted, right? They were far easier to access. But at the same time, I guarantee you that more people wanted to complete the potion sets, wanted to complete the amulet sets. And again, you can win in that sense from quantity rather than quality, right? And then still have the high tier cold foils be the quality aspect, right? So your collection starts on a basis of quantity, and then you slowly move towards quality as you want to continue fleshing it out, as you want to continue piling up the collectible side of Flesh and Blood, not just the playable aspect, or to speculate on what cards will be meta defined. Right then, let's move to the comments. So the first video comments that we're actually going to look at is for my expansion slot video. Right, don't worry, we're going to get to that because spoilers have started coming out, and unless we get clarification from LSS, I have a lot to say on the subject of the expansion slot, and it's just mishmash jumble. Anyway, what do I want to zero in on? Well, this segment, right? So, not against reprints, but they have to be kept in reason. If everything was printed into Oblivion, the EVs of a box would only be like $5, and then absolutely no one would buy products, and everything would go under. So, in more thought about this, I do have sort of a counter argument, right? If playables were printed to Oblivion, in this sense, right? And it was the more economic thing to buy boxes, get your playables, and not use the secondary market, right? While boxes would still sell. But then you also have the aspect where they could then fine-tune the collectible side, right? Because if there is no way to put the value into the majestics, the rares, right? If you were to tweak it, if you were to make them slightly more common than what they are, well, then the value would have to go back into the cold foils. At least that's my perspective, right? Because it has to go somewhere. A box that's $90, the contents has to, on average, across everyone opening, amount to close to that, right? Otherwise, the product just doesn't work. Eventually, it just dies down and dies down. Even Everfest can't go to zero, can't be worthless, because at the end of the day, stores have paid money for it, right? They're going to move it at X amount. Yes, they might take a loss, but they're not going to take a full loss, right? That's just not economically feasible. Okay, so we won't worry about my response, but then, so Tunic, that's the other thing we sort of touched on. So high price of the Tunic is really stalled growth. Debatable, right? Because it's not completely mandatory unless highly competitive. There you go. But that being said, Tunic is 140 in black borders right now. Magic argument is another thing that's always brought up, right? Flesh and Blood is fantastic to sit on cards, if you will. But then counter that argument, right? If the cold form Tunic was the only one worth sitting on, right? If buying the white border variant or the black border variant non-foil went down in value, was easier to acquire, but was down in value, right? Then the argument would essentially be the same, because you don't have to worry about it retaining its value, right? So again, it being high valued has created the argument for it retaining its value, that it's a good investment. But again, my mentality towards it, I think that all the variants but the highest checks. So for the first blocks before 2.0, the Rainbow Foil and the Cold Foil should be held as infallible, if you will, right? So they should be working towards maintaining their value, but they should nuke the other variants. So as a spot reprint, shouldn't be accessible, and then especially the wide border variant. I mean, that's why we're getting another version in Bright Lights, which would probably be the white border, if I had to assume. But yeah, to me, again, the high value versions should be high value. Everything else should be absolutely accessible, right? They shouldn't be cards to speculate on, to hold for down the line, right? So I am with them in continuing to reprint the Tunic and trying to bring down the other variants, right? So yeah, interesting dynamic, right? You're going to upset people one way or the other, right? Because there'll be people who, didn't want the best versions or couldn't get the best versions, and then they don't want their version to go down. But again, something has to happen. Something will happen because, again, they really want to capture this divide, right? They want some cards to be of value and some cards to move and shape the meta game and be playable, right? And playable cards don't necessarily need to be the cards of value. If anything, they should be the accessible cheap cards. And then there are the collector cards. The Marvels, the Fables, the Cold Foils are all the collector element, right? So even the Rainbow Foil Fable being, somewhat cheap, in purview of how hard it is to pull is fine with me, because again, it's a rainbow foil variant. It should be the version of the card that's meant for playing. The cold foil variant should be the collectible aspect. Okay, on to the actual two videos. So finding a cold foil in a box, welcome of Wraith or Arcane Rising, was different because even back then the jank was equipment that you still want to use. So even now Guardians are pretty much still using the Iron Rot leggings, right? Yeah, that does come into fact. I mean, the Null Rune is probably the strongest form of Arcane Barrier because it doesn't get destroyed, right? In fact, it has Arcane Barrier. That's the correct keyword, is it not? And then same with the Iron Rot leggings. They didn't quite recapture. The front line is interesting, but I'm pretty sure the Iron Rot still greatly exceeds that, especially in Classic Constructed. And the Iron Hide, trying to think, I don't remember it off the top of my head, but I know the Iron Rot is still more desirable, right? It still has a more consistent effect, if you will. So yeah, in terms of defensive, both of those sets have a far stronger generic or common set of equipment than anything we've seen today, right? Which again speaks to the whole argument of they really should work on the power level of common and rare equipment to help elevate their usability and their price to that degree. Gold foils we won't touch, right? Because this is a bit lengthier of a discussion, and I might do a video on that another time. Okay. Your argument is greatly flawed. This is equivalent to MTG old school foils and modern foils. The big obvious change is that the print runs greatly increased. Only reason original cold foil commons have value is their low print runs, which is kind of interesting because that's counter to this argument. Compare 1,100 of a card versus, no, is this price? Oh, no, yeah, compare the card having 1,100 printings versus 10,000 printings. Again, it's about supply and demand. Right, if demand exceeds supply, then it will equate in value because of the shortage. So again, I don't like that argument because it is something that LSS has been handling moderately well, right? They have been catering their print runs towards their player base and their demand. So if they time it, right, they could easily make cards more valuable. They loosen it, they could nuke cards again like Everfest and Tails. So yeah, it's very one-sided, right? I'm not going to say they're wrong. I'm not going to say I'm right, right? Because there's multiple perspectives to that argument. Okay, and then gold foils again. This one's a bit shorter, so we might as well. Stop gold foils altogether, right? Make every single majestic in a set have a cold foil version. I do like that idea. Make the rare ones have extremely limited Marvel version of the cold foil. Now again to a bit over the top. Legendary cold foils, only one version, and Fable cold foils. No reprints in cold foils ever again. Stop the gold foil madness, and just give entire booster boxes, packs / mats to tournament winners. They'll keep the thrill of the chase and value back to the cold foils. There's too much spread between gold and cold foils. Gold foils go for thousands, cold foils go for much less. By eliminating the gold foil entirely, this will overall bring the value back up for the gold foiling. In turn, this will make people want to open more boxes. Now, again, just like this argument, there are points in here that I agree with. Doesn't make them right, doesn't make them wrong. There's points that I disagree with, same thing. But in simple, I believe, personally, cards should have three versions, right? They should have a collectible variant, they should have the main playable variant, and then they should have the reprint variant if the playable variant gets out of control, right? That's the ideal solution, and what would you know? That's what we saw through the original model, right? First edition, unlimited, and then the history product, right? How they shape that in 2.0 is sort of out of their hands at the moment, right? It's sort of they went all in on an idea. That idea didn't quite pan out, so now we're getting things like the expansion slot, spot reprints, and the history pack that just sits in the back. And once we get the next year version, 2.0, no, not 2.0, version 2 for English, it's going to be interesting, to say the least. Purpose of gold foils is to incentivize competitive play. If it was not a gold foil, it would be something else of value that would also distract from what you open in boxes. Now, this is another interesting argument to me, right? So the purpose of gold cold foils in the beginning, to me, is obviously because LSS did not have the financial backing to really amp up the competitive scene, right? They only had so much funds to work with, so they need some way to just generate value. So in comes the gold foil cards, right? Back in the original iteration, before there were the prize packets and the random draws and the X amount of printings and the weird pool structure, right? That was the idea. We're at a point where LSS has, put out the money, right? So whether or not an additional card is necessary, I personally would like them move away from them being another value aspect, right? Prize money is prize money, and then have the gold foil be some sort of, a trophy equivalent. Imagine if the international world champion, is it still national? It depends. Well, but if they were in Spain and won in Spain, then that would be national world champion. Anyway, the world champion, right? Imagine if they got their hero and all their armor, all their equipment, their weapon, in gold foil, right? So that the next time they show up, they could just put it all on the table, right? They are the gilded champion. Imagine that idea. You'd flood the market, right? Because you'd be giving out more cards, especially if you then move it to the national championships or the calling, battle hardened, all the other segments where gold foils are given out. But it would still be a pretty neat idea, right? You come across someone, they have gold foil equipment, you instantly know, damn, I'm playing a champion, right? I like that mentality a bit more than being random prize cards that aren't necessarily always going to be something you're going to use. I think having them as show-off pieces is a far better way to capture what gold foils to me should represent, what they did represent, rather than being an additional prize along with the prize money, right? Again, Flesh and Blood will continue to grow. I would absolutely assume that next year they will put out even more money and continue till they get a real functional pro circuit. So to that degree, right, I don't think they need gold foils to hold the value that they are holding, right? They don't need to be the cherry on top. I would rather than be the real trophy of winning, right? The real thing to show off. But that's my 2 cents. Okay? Purpose of gold foils is to incentivize competitive play. If it was not gold foils, something else of value would need to distract from what you open in a box. Sorry, something of value would then distract from what you open in a box. Again, we're past the point of gold foils being necessary. Prize cards, judge cards, they're all fantastic ideas, right? Using a lottery system to generate value, to make sure that X cards don't diminish in value, that is where it gets a bit not so great for me personally, right? Again, I'd rather them be a trophy element rather than another, prize element, so to speak, prize in terms of monetary value or potential monetary value. And the micro responses, well, they're basically what I'm saying. You can read them if you want. Both sentiments have valid points, and I personally think the big misstep was choosing cards that are meant to be collectible aspects of a box. Yes, so that's actually another good talking point. I'm glad I read me. Good job. So, yeah, I think, again, going back to what I said before about there being 3 variants, that includes the gold foils. So I think Majestics would be an excellent idea to transition into gold foils, or as the prize card, if you will, right? So you have the collectible variant, you have the rainbow foil, and you have the playable normal, and then you have any reprintings in white border. I think that's a better idea. Again, just squeezing and condensing everything down so there isn't so much overlap or cannibalizing of interests would be great. That is what I would personally like to see. Again, gold foils do detract from a mental perspective for me. It is, well, I want to own the best. The best is a gold. I can't get a gold, so I guess I won't bother with the silver. That's a winning attitude, if you will, so it's not necessarily correct again, but that is one of the mentalities that I do hold, right? And I would think has some degree of impact, because there has to be at least, one person who thinks like me, sure. Anyway, I think we'll leave it there, right? Let me know your thoughts, feelings, and let's have a discussion. See ya.